This is Monocle on Fashion, a show on Monocle Radio offering global perspectives and nuanced conversation on the worlds of fashion and style. I'm Natalie Theodosi, your host and Monocle's fashion director. This is a particularly busy week for the fashion industry, with the Fashion Awards taking place in London and Chanel's Métiers d'Art show, the first under Mathieu Blazy, happening across the pond in New York. We are here to dissect it all, starting with a conversation about the short film teasing the upcoming Chanel show, a quintessential New York story starring brand ambassadors A$AP Rocky and Margaret Qualley.
What are they trying to do? What are they trying to market? And often there's a bit of shoehorning in of the product.
We then come straight back to London to sit down with Kate Hawley, the costume designer of the much-celebrated film Frankenstein, who received the first ever costume designer award at this year's Fashion Awards.
It is a wonderful thing to see the craft celebrated and elevated. And at the end of the day, whether you're a fashion designer or a costume designer, we are all designers.
Speaking of London's Fashion Awards, for our main interview this week, we wanted to highlight one of the city's biggest success stories, Erdem Moralioglu. Erdem started his eponymous label 20 years ago, never took investment, and built a global business out of his East London atelier. We visited him in his new Sloane Street shop to talk about his success formula and the beautiful new space he created with his partner Philip Joseph.
It's wonderful to be able to have the collection live in a space that's representative of your world.
This and more on Monocle on Fashion. First, I'm joined by Monocle on Fashion's producer and our resident film expert, Lily Austin, to talk about Chanel's latest film.
Hello, Natalie.
Hello again. So I woke up on Monday morning, I watched the Chanel film and saw a little bit about the conversation around it. There's a lot of divided opinion. I thought we have to speak about it, and I wanted to get your expert take on what did you think? Is it a good idea for Chanel to be commissioning and investing in these films just in the lead up to their big shows?
I mean, yes, I think clearly the fact that there's been a lot of conversation about it, even if it's divisive, that's probably a good move, right? And Michel Gondry is actually one of my favourite directors. He directed Eternal Sunshine, The Spotless Mind and The Science of Sleep, both beautiful films. So given the kind of dreamlike quality to the film, it makes sense to use him. And yeah, I was happy to see that he directed it. But I'm not sure about in general about fashion films.
That's interesting. Why?
I think that often, I mean, I like the theory of it, but I think so often it's quite difficult for a brand, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to market? And often there's a bit of shoehorning in of the product. And I think we kind of see that in this film, the moment when A$AP Rocky runs through and puts on these suits. I almost felt like, was that just a moment to get in another Chanel look? Do we need it? So this is why I don't know if it always works. I don't know if it's always clear what is being kind of marketed almost.
You're right. So when it's about the product in some ways. You know what? I loved the fact that it shows a girl in her little New York apartment. She's taking the subway and her boyfriend is running through the streets. They're not, and it's, if you think about Chanel, the brand, that is a really bold statement. Things were a lot more polished. It was a very different image up until September when Mathieu Blazy took over. So I think to show a Chanel woman on a subway is actually, to me, quite a powerful statement. Of course, I thought that if they want those kind of cool girls that like fashion, but also take the subway, they need to rethink their pricing a little bit. That's a whole other conversation. But I thought, and that's what Mathieu does so well, I think. He works in the highest kind of level of luxury, but he finds with the people that he picks as ambassadors, with imagery, with just his own very warm demeanor, he makes a brand feel a little bit more inclusive. And I think that's a really powerful thing, especially as luxury has gotten very out of reach at this moment in time.
And I'm sure that's why they chose to work with Michel Gondry, because that's definitely his aesthetic. You know, his films are a lot more kind of, not exactly gritty, but have this kind of low-res, unpolished look to them.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was, a very deliberate choice, clearly, to like take it in this direction and it be less kind of, shiny and like hyper luxury.
Exactly. And I think it is something that has been happening a lot more. These big directors producing and directing films for big brands. And in some cases, I mean, when you look at Saint Laurent that has now a production agency, it's the relationship is taken to a whole new level. And because Hollywood is not what it used to be, I guess there's a positive in the sense that now these fashion brands that have become such huge businesses can give something back and commission films and give some of their budgets to filmmakers, no?
Yeah, no, I think that is a very good point. It's definitely, the film industry is in a difficult position. It has been for a few years. So that's definitely a good point. I mean, it's kind of interesting because a lot of these directors who are now kind of well-known, established names, started out doing like music videos back in the 90s and then went into film. So it's kind of interesting to have them like
now fashion's just taking over.
Yeah, fashion's taking over, but going back to these kind of shorter films. It is, I mean, now I'm kind of coming around to the idea that maybe I don't always like know if they work from a, I guess, more sort of marketing perspective. But it is nice to see directors being given the opportunity to do something smaller and do a slightly different kind of smaller creative project that can come out.
Yeah, I think you made a really good point, though, that when the product placement has to be quite subtle, or maybe it shouldn't even be there at all. Mm-hmm. They should look at it as kind of an investment in culture. And another thing that is a big conversation is the role of the costume designer, and it's tied into all of this. They are becoming, someone was telling me, the new influencers, and there's a lot more attention to them, to the work that they do, and a lot more acknowledgement. Mm-hmm. And you spoke to Kate Hawley, who received a fashion award this week, and it's the first time that the British Fashion Council is giving a costume designer an award. What do you think about acknowledging costume designers more in this fashion award ceremonies and giving them more of the spotlight?
I love it. I think it's great. In a way, I was sort of surprised. It hadn't really occurred to me before that there isn't a costume designer award until this year. And I think it's great because it's a really important part, I think, of the industry as well. I mean, on this particular film, on Frankenstein, they partnered with Tiffany & Co. and borrowed lots of vintage. They dived into their archive and borrowed lots of pieces for the film. And honestly, I was so thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to Kate because when I went to see Frankenstein a few weeks ago, I was completely bowled over by the clothes. Like, the costumes are incredible. The use of color is amazing. And I think it is such a great platform for designers, these films that, I mean, it's kind of rarer and rarer, but Frankenstein is a great example of a film that really made full use of every opportunity to have these kind of crazy costumes, but with these kind of modern elements. The use of color is very contemporary. So I think it's great that they're being acknowledged. I think Kate Hawley is a very worthy first recipient.
Yeah, I think we need new kind of people to take the spotlight versus the usual suspects. So it's a great recognition. And let's hear your conversation with Kate Hawley.
In terms of Frankenstein, I was very familiar with the novel and revisited that when Guillermo told me we were making his version of it. And then, really my main inspiration and the start of everything always comes from the script and your director's vision, and all the themes of nature and theology and, the mythologies and that are all there in the script that he's built, and all the imagery is sort of sitting there, and it was a matter of sort of pulling it out and sort of, working with all the other departments and then sort of building on that language and finding and discovering ways to interpret it. And so, nature and religion, there's certain shapes and imagery that were echoed in the set, and Guillermo asked me to reflect the set. He always talks about the costume as the architecture is the lighting. So we all work very closely as departments. But within that and within my department, we're, working out the language of fabrics and what it means. And it was a big part of the script really for me was about the tone and mood, and I'd say the same about the novel, that there was this wonderful sense of melancholy and sort of dreamlike tone, and I think that was the leading quality that then informed how we resolved all those other images in the form of textiles or silhouette and detailing. Really, it all came from that, trying to find a mood and a tone. So it was about, sort of the dream of it really, and on this sort of operatic scale that he was, building. He talks about his banquet table, and it's a bloody big one. We're all invited as different departments to sit at this table. So it's a rich meal to get through.
Absolutely. I really was struck in this film in particular. I mean, his films are always very cohesive, but in this one in particular, I thought, wow, the costumes, the set, everything really works together. So I wasn't surprised when I read that you're also a set designer. I can imagine that must help in kind of making that cohesive look and feel of the film.
Yeah, I think so, because you're always dealing with character within a landscape, whether it's whatever that landscape is, artificial or real, so it's the world that you're building and the tones. And so, I work very closely with Tamara. I also studied, I did a bit of scenic painting at English National Opera. I did all the night shifts. So I learned a bit, about colour. And so all of those things have informed how I work with Guillermo and through Dan Louston, the lighting designer and cinematographer, as well as Tamara. And so we're always echoing each other's work. We're sort of painting across between our different departments in a way. And Guillermo is such a, it's such a big vision he has for this world. So I kind of liken it to all sort of, really we're different elements of his orchestra, we're different sections of his orchestra. So we're all, at times we will come together and work towards one image, and at other times, he's elevating different parts of the different departments to tell the story. So it works because we're collaborating. There's no room to be an island, and he makes himself so totally available. And then we do the same with each other, and always being informed what the other is doing,
You mentioned colour, and I was really struck by the use of colour in the film. I think I audibly gasped when I saw the young Frankenstein's mother in that amazing red outfit with the red veil on her face. It was just so striking. Clearly this is a period piece and there was period dress, but this kind of thing to me felt quite modern. Were you consciously kind of trying to achieve that kind of blend of the two?
It's a good question, actually, because that's one of the very first things when Guillermo and I were talking about Frankenstein. He was very insistent that we don't get locked in sort of an old world, and because of the nature of Victor's pursuit of his muse, and that he wanted this contemporary feel, this modern feel. And it was a directive in terms of the wardrobe that it doesn't sit in a sort of Dickensian world, that we elevate it to reflect that, really. So, that was definitely a part of it, but we found it's finding the language through it. And you talk about that red veil, and that's a classic way for Guillermo to open a story. You establish the operatic language right from the beginning, and then that becomes the through line. That red veil, becomes the stained bloodied hand on young Victor Frankenstein. It becomes the glove then on the adult Victor Frankenstein. The effigy in the coffin is repeated in Elizabeth's work. So you have a through line that Guillermo's establishing with the colour red, and then all these other colours with the different characters and that come off that, that sort of, but we go in a circle with that story of the red, and we end, of course, with Elizabeth, spoilers here, bleeding out through the bridal dress.
Mm-hmm. And you also collaborated with Tiffany's for the film. Will you tell us a bit about that?
Oh, that was kind of a wonderful moment. I was one of those classic sort of throwaway sentences at the beginning. It had never been in my sort of dream that would even be possible. But I think I remember sort of throwing down some stuff at some point and go, oh, we need some jewelry. And then sort of, it's always, how do you do this? And whatever budget you have, there's limitations, and how do we solve it? And Steve Newman, who was there from Netflix, actually opened the door and introduced us to Catherine, who works with Tiffany's a lot, Catherine Van der Veen. And, I think on both sides, it was like a sort of odd date night. Neither knew what the other was going to get out of it. I sort of had looked online and went, I'm not sure if the lock bracelet or whatever is going to be particularly useful for us. And, and they'd gone, oh, Frankenstein, that's the one with the bolts in the head. So, it was sort of like this weird sort of date night. And then we met online and had meetings, and we showed drawings. And really it was the vision of Guillermo that unlocked the door, because Guillermo was doing this hugely romantic, operatic, rich world, and even the language of love in its odd way sort of fitted with Tiffany's, so they came on board. And it was at that moment, I remember my crew, when we told them, they were sort of so thrilled, and it meant that there's a certain shared love of craftsmanship and appreciation for what the other was bringing. So it never felt things were being imposed on us. It was the language of what they had in the archives. I mean, that was really the biggest moment for me, was looking at the archives and seeing all the things that I was not familiar with, the art glass and the jewelry and the nature in the forms of those scarab necklaces and that. And it fitted Guillermo's language so perfectly and supported the story and the character of Elizabeth so perfectly. Sometimes things just open the door and they keep presenting more and more wonderful possibilities. And it was like that. It was just another wonderful, they brought their certain element of magic fairy dust to the project, and, it supported everything that Guillermo was trying to do. So it was a really wonderful, wonderful experience.
And just finally, tonight you will be attending the Fashion Awards and receiving the first ever...
I'm such an unfashionable creature, but yes.
But I think it's amazing that this is their first costume designer award. I couldn't actually believe that they didn't already have this award, but you'll be receiving it for the first time. How does that feel to be kind of recognised by the fashion community in this way?
Oh, it's quite overwhelming in the loveliest way possible. But also, I sit back and I look at all the partnerships of the past, and I will mention Milena Canonero and what she did through Barry Lyndon and Clockwork Orange, and the partnerships with Stanley Kubrick, and your own Sandy Powell, who all of so many wonderful designers, Piero Tosi, so many designers who've had that impact over the years. And I would never put myself in that place, but it is a wonderful thing to see the craft celebrated and elevated. And at the end of the day, whether you're a fashion designer or a costume designer, we are all designers. And, and we maybe have a different story to tell. We have a different master to serve, but we're all designers at the end of the day. So it's a wonderful thing, and a wonderful thing particularly for my crew. All the tailors, milliners, the UK crew, the Toronto crew, all the artisans that took part in this and contributed so much to the language of the world that we were creating with their skill and craftsmanship. It's so wonderful to have their work celebrated and be recognised as well.
That was costume designer Kate Hawley talking to Monocle on Fashion's Lily Austin. And now off to Sloane Street to speak with Erdem Moralioglu and architect Philip Joseph about the new boutique they have just opened. Located in a 1920s Art Deco building just across from luxury giant Hermes, this new space is a very confident statement about the Erdem brand, and it offers a real insight into the designer's charming world. Between the baby blue hand-painted canvas walls, the books handpicked from the pair's home library, and the modernist lighting pieces, this is the kind of space you want to hang around in. I started by asking Erdem and Philip about their creative process and what it means for the business to make such a confident statement on a prime retail spot.
Well, we opened our Mayfair store on South Audley Street over 10 years ago. Yeah. So really that's our flagship and the home of her, this muse in a way. And we really felt like it really caters to a very specific customer and client. And it's much more about individual appointments. It's where, really those customers are coming for bespoke appointments as well. And we felt like there was space and scope to open another pied-à-terre on Sloane Street. There's been, of course, a whole new renewal. And I think what felt very interesting for us is the South Audley Street store is like a beautiful secret. It's off the beaten path. And of course, in this new home on Sloane Street, you're very much in the center of something. We have many neighbors that are exciting to be with, and it's an exciting place to be. It's definitely a different customer.
And it's a really confident statement, I guess, for where your brand is and how much you've grown over 20 years, right?
Yes. So in February 2026, we'll be celebrating our 20-year anniversary. So it's really exciting to be independent and to have been able to really kind of create these environments where they're an extension of the collection and her world. So yeah, it's wonderful.
And tell me, so you've decided you found the right spot. I'm very curious, what were the initial conversations that you were having? Because you're partners in life, you've also already created the first store together. What were those initial conversations and ideas when you were brainstorming about what you wanted it to feel like, what the concept was going to be?
Philip and I met well over 20 years ago at the Royal College. I was studying fashion and Philip was studying architecture. And so from the very, very beginning, Philip, from my graduate collection, knew who I was as a designer. We worked together on those first initial shows, designing the spaces. And of course, Philip designed South Audley Street when he set up his design architecture practice. And we've just always collaborated. But the initial conversations were very open, actually.
Yeah, I suppose the difference was always that South Audley Street was in a sort of beautiful 19th century building on a very beautiful street. And then when we came here, this is a really beautiful building. It's a deco building, but, you could describe it as a more conventional retail space in that there's not a huge amount of natural light. It has a sort of quite conventional sort of storefront. And so it sort of felt like the task of kind of bringing an identity to the space was a greater one than in South Audley Street, where there were sort of historic features to play off. And, we made some interventions in South Audley Street that were quite powerful. Like there's a sort of quite grand new staircase that we inserted there. But here we wanted to kind of give it quite a sort of strong identity that still felt of Erdem, and also looking to, future spaces to kind of think about a new language that could travel and that would be identifiable in different contexts.
You always draw inspiration from art, a lot of women artists as well. So what was that process, finding the right pieces for this space and giving them a spotlight?
I mean, really beginning with South Audley Street, we had the task of trying to figure out what would go where. And we commissioned Kate Hawley, who's an amazing artist who I really love. I commissioned her to paint a picture of my late mother. And also kind of an interesting challenge because she generally paints at a slightly smaller scale. And to paint something very big, we had done an amazing collaboration with Michael Anastasiadis, who designed a beautiful light feature. Again, creating one of the biggest pieces he's ever done. So getting him to work in a scale that he's never worked in. Yeah, so there was Kay, there was an artist named Anne Collier, who I love. So female artists, very important, but also works by Andy Warhol, Cocteau. And so when we were trying to figure out the world of this store, again, we looked at the things that we've collected over the years, and there were just certain things that felt right. There's a German sculptor named Wilhelm Lembruck, who we love, and his sculptures that are so kind of extraordinary and kind of very poetic. Early Nan Golden, we were looking at Tracy Emin.
Yeah, there's a Nan Golden picture that we had at home, actually, called Jaeger in the Mirror. And she just never really looked that great at home. And then we had this amazing moment where we brought her in here as we were sort of bringing the art in.
Gets a new lease of life.
Oh, she looked absolutely fantastic. Yeah. She looks amazing here.
It was so interesting how things kind of transform. And even I think when we were kind of curating the pieces and figuring out what goes where, the juxtaposition of a 17th century portrait of a woman with a pearl necklace, very regal, next to the kind of looseness and kind of sensuality of the Tracy Emin nude felt very, very interesting. So you have always this kind of push and pull with the art, which is, I think, so interesting, like whether it's like a very formal, static portrait or something that is much more loose, and also a lot of German expressionism, some pieces by Henry Lamb. It was an interesting thing to put together.
And it's quite representative of the way of your fashion collections as well, right? And the way that you think about clothes. Because when I look at your collections or read the show notes, which I always love doing, there's always all these interesting references and weaving different periods, women from different backgrounds. So is that, I wonder, and for you, Philip, when you're thinking about interiors and bringing the brand to life within a retail space, is it important to portray the same values? Do you think about the fashion collections and how Erdem is designing clothing, or some people like to keep it quite separate, others is kind of bring it all together?
I mean, one thing I will say about this space, it's interesting because it was created off the back of a collection that I had done inspired by Kate Hawley. And there was something about the brushstroke and the kind of she has this extraordinary way of painting, and it's so human and gestural, and there's like a kind of a richness to her colors. And I can't help but feel like a connection between these kind of wall panels, her artwork, and
but there's also like something about, like you were saying, the perfectly imperfect, and you do it, I think, in many of your collections, that there's something about the precision of the cut. When you see the toile and the silhouette and the cut, I mean, it's incredibly architectural, right? And so incredibly precise, and actually even the act of kind of making a garment is so satisfying and architectural in a way, sort of making something from two-dimensional pieces that become three-dimensional. But there's something specifically in the way that you're making some of these garments where the edges at the seam are kind of frayed, maybe at the bottom, it has a sort of undoneness to it. And so that's something that I love to explore in our work. The precision of the architecture meets the imprecision of a surface that reveals the patina of age, or that is really quite rough. So in this store, for instance, we use this reclaimed black encaustic tile on the floor, and it's quite rough actually, but it's held in a kind of very precise way, and that's something I find very satisfying, is that tension between the sort of precision and the sort of undoneness. And I think that is something that's definitely present in Erdem's work, for sure.
It's actually so interesting to hear someone whose practice is different talking about fashion, and I think it's clear that like it's all interwoven together, and the way that you work together, it's part of kind of the success of it all, because it's a consistent narrative, I think, and one world. I want to speak about the furniture pieces as well, and like, there's so many interesting items. Talk me through some of your favorites and how you were both kind of selecting them.
For years, we've collaborated with a furniture maker called Jeremy Pitts, who makes furniture from solid wood, and I kind of really love, in the spirit of sort of Nakashima, or to actually kind of find the beauty in a piece of wood and kind of make things out of solid wood. And so here, I think particularly in a retail environment, it's very unusual to find kind of solid wood furniture, actually. And so here we sort of developed this system of armatures that I was quite inspired by BPPR and obviously Scarpa. They hold these sort of big solid planks of Scottish elm that were made by Jeremy. And then he made a table here, but also in the vitrine upstairs, the base of the vitrine is made out of solid elm as well. So, I mean, he's really amazing, and we work with him on lots of projects.
There is a language that continued from South Audley Street, and I think also from Philip's World collaborators that he's worked with again and again, and giving them different challenges, whether it's Carl Aubuck, who Philip developed these kind of extraordinary, very delicate, almost like
dress stands
where something hangs. It's very delicate. Michael Anastasiadis is an ongoing collaboration.
He's a favorite of ours as well in Monocle.
We love Michael. But there's a very funny story here, actually, because I work with Michael on lots of projects and love his work. And I sort of had this idea here to have Erdem's atelier make a sort of taffeta sheath to go over Michael's pendant rod of one of his kind of classic egg pendants. I think he calls it the philosophical egg. So we had this idea to sort of have Erdem's atelier make this quite sort of blousy sheath.
We had gone to
Genoa. It was from a palazzo in Genoa, yeah.
And seen these amazing kind of taffeta draped. It goes over the chain that holds chandeliers.
Yeah.
From the 18th century. So it's
earlier.
Even earlier. They're extraordinary and so kind of blousy and kind of incongruous as well. So Philip had this great idea of bringing that world of taffeta and cloth and mixing it with
with the precision of Michael's world.
Yeah. And I think, again, it's this push and pull. And even thinking about the mannequins that Philip developed for the store with Bonavare, he had this idea of, in relationship to our wall panels, the idea of
a sculptor's maquette
of plaster, and the idea of, this thing that has that tactility of a plaster sculpture, which again, when you look at the kind of the chalkiness of the painted walls, the mannequins also have this kind of strange, beautiful finish. So
the funny story was that I'm asking Michael, I said, would you mind if we did this to your light? Because he loved it. He was really into it, which is great.
And you're also going against a lot of the traditional kind of retail rules. Instead of filling up spaces with products, you are putting beautiful books and sculpture and really giving, I think, an insight into your world. So tell me, why is that kind of something really important for you? A store is not just the collection, but it is also the art, books from your home and all these different objects.
It's wonderful to be able to have the collection live in a space that's representative of your world, and to have a client be able to walk into a space and understand the art that I find inspiring, a world that one inspires the other, and everything is kind of interconnected. I think all of these pieces, whether it's the artwork or the books or the clothes or a bag, have a kind of permanence. You have them and they're things that you have forever. And I love that they all live together. And I really do feel like what Philip was able to achieve with both spaces, whether it's South Audley Street or Sloane Street, it's about her and this idea and this kind of abstract idea of the muse and different facets of her. And that was always very, very important, that it was, a place where you feel like you can relax and spend a few hours. And it's wonderful to have an environment where someone can feel like they're part of your world.
Yeah. And I think also this is, an incredible story of retail and a beautiful space, but it's also an entrepreneurial story, because we're in London. Not many brands make it. I think through the 10-year mark is usually kind of quite critical. You've done 20 years, which is quite unbelievable, because I remember your first collections and I think we're all still 20, so I don't know if that's enough. I think that's also important to unpack. And the way that you're speaking, it seems like having a close-knit team of collaborators, people that you trust, and staying consistent and keep kind of working with them and experimenting is part of that success recipe. Do you think, if you kind of were to look back and have a bird's eye view, is that part of it?
I definitely think what's interesting thinking about, especially with February coming and this idea of 20 years, I feel, I don't feel any different in terms of this feeling of beginning and exploring ideas and being curious. In a way, my vision of her remains very, very consistent, and the people I surround myself with and collaborate with remains consistent. Of course, like Philip being my husband as well, is someone who so innately understands every collection and sees everything, sees every stitch. And so to have someone create an environment who has seen everything literally since your graduate collection is kind of amazing.
Beautiful.
And also part of, I love people like Michael Anastasiadis, Karl Aubach, these amazing continuous threads in the environments that are part of our world. And it's really wonderful. I love the idea of continuity.
It's interesting because we did the first store 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. And there was an initial feeling, oh, it's 10 years old, we've just got to change everything, And then because we want to do something new and different. But actually, as we started to design it, we thought, it was so right. Many of the decisions we made back then were so right. So it really should be an evolution of that and not starting afresh. And it still feels good. That store in South Audley Street still feels good today. It still feels great.
And it's interesting because it's also 20 years of being independent, and
that's another very rare thing that not many people can say.
But I think that has to do with this idea of a permanence. And I really think actually the way Philip approaches his environments, whether it's a building or relooking at a very old structure historically and creating some kind of intervention. I think if there's a commonality or a relationship between our work is this idea of creating something that has a permanence, and also maybe a push and pull between the kind of wrong, right, the human hand with precision, all of those things. But I feel like it's a really exciting, interesting time, and this store is an environment is kind of representative of a new chapter.
Absolutely. And I think it's interesting when you said such a good marker of success, whether you're looking at a dress or a shop, a piece of design, that it doesn't feel dated after 10 years. And on a more general note, I wonder, how do you stay inspired? Because there's so much rich history and references into your work. I mean, when looking at this space, there's all these different elements to pick up. So do you delve deep into research? Do you exchange references with each other? What does that process look like? Because that's also, I think, quite a hard thing when you're running a business. The pace of the industry, both our industries are quite grueling. Like, to stay motivated and inspired is not an easy thing.
My answer is quite simple. Every week I try. I don't always succeed, but I go to London Library every Tuesday and I sketch. I lock my phone away in a locker. I work with a librarian there on research, and I dedicate a day to just either draw or try to figure out where we're going to go next. Some days are good days and it all comes to you. Some are not good and nothing comes to you, but at least you're surrounded by all of this inspiration. And I love working with a librarian, and that I find kind of really amazing and slightly outside of the box. So I really try to dedicate time to think about something that's nothing to do with other aspects of what you have to do during the week, but rather just focusing on the idea of where we're going to go next in terms of who she is and what ideas are we going to explore.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think anyone listening should take note. It's so inspiring. What about you, Philip?
Yeah, I mean, I would say we, in terms of our exchange, we love to kind of see things together, right? So we kind of love to travel and kind of see things together. And I feel that I'm just constantly looking and taking pictures. And so it's just a constant, notebook of references, details, materials,
It's interesting, even, places like Genoa, but also even, spending time in Seoul. And also one thing to say is Philip we opened a store and a shop-in-shop space in Seoul as well, and taking the environment that was developed in South Audley Street and bringing that to a different country that is very different. And it was also a really interesting exercise. But to say that we often find ourselves just with our eyes open, looking at things we've never seen before, and inspiration kind of can come from the most surprising places.
But it's good to put yourself in those places. I think that's the thing. I mean, it sort of had this tradition of kind of going to a different city after each show. In fact, we need to revive the tradition. But
it's a great tradition.
Yeah, neither of us have been to.
Yeah,
nice.
And so there was always a weekend after the show that's sort of quiet, and so we would take ourselves off to a different city each time. And that sort of thing is just really food for what we do, I think.
Power of the unfamiliar, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That was Erdem Moralioglu and Philip Joseph. And that's it for today's show. Next week, we're off to Paris, so stay tuned for more designer interviews, retail news, and much more. Today's episode was edited and produced by Lily Austin and Steph Jungu. I'm Natalie Theodosi. Thank you so much for listening.